Back in 1820, author Washington Irving created a short story entitled The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It brought to life the haunting character of the Headless Horseman. This legendary tale would become the stuff of nightmares and scare people of all ages. So what was the next best thing to do? That's right, adapt it into a movie. And not just any movie, we're talking about Disney's The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. I meant Tim Burton's 1999 horror film, Sleepy Hollow. Of all the adaptations to release, this one is the perfect version. So why and how did this get made? And how on earth did Tim Burton end up directing this gothic masterpiece? Let's find out on WTF Happened to This Horror Movie.
No, you must believe me. It was a horseman, a dead one, headless.
In 1993, screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker developed a script based on Washington's short story. The script caught the attention of producer Scott Rudin. Rudin optioned the project to Paramount Pictures with Kevin Yeager, a makeup effects designer and part adapter of the screenplay, to direct the picture. Paramount disagreed and demoted Yeager's involvement to prosthetic makeup designer. Jump forward to 1998. Paramount's then CEO, Sherry Lansing, revived the interest in bringing Sleepy Hollow to life. Adam Schroeder, a movie producer, had shepherded Burton's classic Edward Scissorhands and said he was perfect for the job. Burton, after coming off the troubled production of Superman Lives, was hired to direct the film. Tim Burton has often been drawn to dark and fantastical stories, and his unique visual style has made him a prominent filmmaker in the realm of gothic and macabre cinema. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow had always intrigued Burton due to its blend of horror, mystery, and folklore. He was particularly interested in exploring the Headless Horseman character and the eerie atmosphere of Sleepy Hollow. Burton would go on to say that Sleepy Hollow is an homage to Hammer film productions such as Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Jason and the Argonauts, and Scream, Blackula Scream. Tim brought Andrew Kevin Walker to work on the rewrite of the script, but Scott Rudin would suggest that Tom Stoppard rewrite the script to add to the comical aspects of Ichabod's mannerisms and emphasize the character's romance more. Now on to casting. As we've all come to know, Johnny Depp is Tim's first choice as a male lead, and as so, he was the man. Paramount begged Tim to consider others such as Brad Pitt, Liam Neeson, and Daniel Day-Lewis. Burton only wanted Johnny, and this would be their third collaboration together. After reading Stoppard's rewrites, Johnny wanted to change Ichabod's character and make him a delicate and fragile person.
I saw him.
He didn't want Ichabod to be some action star swooping into town to save the day. The rest of the cast included Jeffrey Jones, Christopher Walken, Martin Landau, Christina Ricci, Michael Gambon, and Miranda Richardson. In regard to filming, the production's budget was $30 million and was to predominantly be shot in England. That's where Burton shot Batman, and he agreed to film there. Production began on November 20th, 1998 at Leavesden Film Studios, which had just wrapped production on Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Most of the production took place here, but filming for the massive Tree of the Dead set was shot at Shepperton Studios. Production then moved to the Coldenfall Estate, Hambledon, for a month-long shoot in March of 1999. The town of Sleepy Hollow was constructed there. Filming continued through April, and some last-minute scenes were shot using a soundstage in Yonkers, New York in May. Tim Burton's distinct visual style was brought to life through elaborate production design, gothic costumes, and atmospheric lighting. Cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki worked closely with Burton to capture the film's dark and eerie ambiance. Production design was done by Rick Heinrichs, who helped create the supernatural feel to the film. Heinrichs was also influenced by American colonial architecture, German Expressionism, and Dr. Seuss illustrations. One soundstage at Leavesden was dedicated to the Forest to the Field set. This scene is where the Headless Horseman races out of the woods and into a field. This stage then was transformed into a graveyard, cornfields, a churchyard, and a snowy battlefield. I guess you can say they got their money's worth with this soundstage. When time came for post-production, Industrial Light and Magic would take the helm. There were 150 visual effects that the team was involved with, while Kevin Yeager would supervise the human and creature effects. Framestore also assisted on the visual effects, and The Mill handled motion control photography. Burton opted to use as limited a number of digital effects as possible. For the Headless Horseman digital effects to work, stuntman Ray Park wore a blue ski mask for chroma key effect so ILM could digitally remove his head. Burton worked with editor Chris Levinson to shape the final narrative and pacing of the film. They crafted the tense and atmospheric tone, balancing horror, mystery, and dark humor.
Watch your head!
The film's sound design played a crucial role in creating a haunting atmosphere, and Danny Elfman composed the score, which added depth and emotion to the scenes. The plot of Sleepy Hollow is set in the late 18th century and follows Ichabod Crane, a New York City constable with progressive investigative methods. Crane is sent to the secluded town of Sleepy Hollow, where a series of mysterious decapitations have terrorized the community. The victims are believed to have been slain by the legendary Headless Horseman. Crane, a skeptic who believes in scientific reasoning, becomes embroiled in the superstitious world of Sleepy Hollow. As he delves deeper into the case, he meets Katrina Van Tassel, the beautiful daughter of a wealthy local family, and develops feelings for her. Crane's investigation leads him to uncover dark secrets, hidden identities, and a web of betrayal within the town. As he encounters the ghostly Headless Horseman and witnesses his relentless pursuit, Crane struggles to solve the mystery and bring justice to Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow was released on November 17, 1999, in the year most people say is the greatest year for movies. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $206 million worldwide against a production budget of around $100 million. It performed well at the box office, appealing to audiences with its blend of horror, mystery, and Tim Burton's distinct visual style. The film received favorable reviews from critics, who praised its visuals, performances, and Burton's direction. Some critics have pointed out that the film relies heavily on its visuals and style, sometimes at the expense of a more compelling narrative. However, opinions on films are subjective, and different individuals may have varying tastes and preferences. The atmospheric, gothic aesthetic and dark humor resonated with many reviewers. Johnny Depp's portrayal of Ichabod Crane was particularly acclaimed for its quirky and eccentric charm. It was also well received by audiences, with many embracing its mix of horror, fantasy, and dark comedy. The film's distinctive visual style and Burton's unique storytelling appealed to his fan base and attracted new viewers. Sleepy Hollow received recognition during the awards season. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: Best Art Direction, which it won, Best Cinematography, and Best Costume Design. The film was also nominated for 3 BAFTA Awards and winning 2 for Best Production Design as well as Best Costume Design. It was a favorite at the Blockbuster Entertainment Awards, winning for Favorite Actor, Actress, and Favorite Supporting Actress as well. Paramount Home Video released Sleepy Hollow on DVD and VHS on May 23, 2000. Before Blu-ray was the choice for high-definition home media, Paramount would get caught in the craze of HD DVD and released it on this format in 2006. Paramount came to their senses and would release the film on Blu-ray in 2008. For its 20th anniversary, Paramount released a Blu-ray digibook with a photo book containing the original story on September 24, 2019. And because this is such a beloved and celebrated film, on September 5, 2023, Paramount released the film on 4K as well as a separate 4K steelbook. as you can see, there are many ways to view this film in both standard and high definition format. Or, if that isn't important to you, there's always streaming services to choose from. Over the years, Sleepy Hollow has maintained a strong following and continues to be appreciated for its atmospheric visuals, memorable characters, and gothic tone. It has become a cult favorite among fans of Tim Burton's work and gothic horror. It's one of my favorite films by the expert director. If you grew up in the 90s, you'd absolutely put Tim at the top of your list as one of the best directors. While it may not be Beetlejuice or Edward Scissorhands, it's certainly one of Tim's best, especially in the horror genre, and continues to be a fan favorite over 20 years later. Unfortunately, Paramount is in the works of rebooting the classic film with Lindsay Beer both writing and directing it. Will this reboot prove to be as good as Tim's gothic horror movie? Will Johnny Depp's replacement have the same charisma? Will Christina Ricci play a legacy character? Only time will tell. In summary, Sleepy Hollow was both a commercial success and received positive reviews. Its visually striking production design, captivating performances, and Burton's distinct directorial style contributed to its enduring popularity among audiences and solidified its place as a notable entry in Tim Burton's filmography.
Never was a horseman, there never will be a horseman.
The horror landscape is filled to the brim with icons and mascots that were successful and failures. The big ones like Freddy, Jason, and Michael speak for themselves, hence only needing their first names mentioned here. You could even go another round with Pinhead, Leprechaun, or Leatherface for that matter. Looking down the aisle at the literal murderer's row of horror movie villains, you can't shake a stick without hitting some one-off baddies that were clearly meant for multi-movie stardom, but due to box office or critical hate, were regulated to one movie. Killers like Horace Pinker from Shocker, Dr. Decker from Nightbreed, and Cropsey from The Burning. What about those stuck in a limbo of absolute anguish? The ones that have only one or at most two good movies to their name while never getting the further respect that they deserved. Pumpkinhead is one of those movie monsters that really should have taken off, but over the course of nearly 20 years it has 4 movies, a video game, and a comic series that is full of unfulfilled potential. I think most people know the name, but does that first movie stand the test of time? The movie Pumpkinhead is actually inspired by the poem of the same name by Ed Justin. Maybe we could have saved this for an adaptation video, but Pumpkinhead is a movie that seems to have a much better reputation than the rest of its series. Kind of like that first couple of Hellraiser movies. The production company who had purchased the rights, De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, approached legendary FX master Stan Winston with the script to get his opinion of the special effects and how much he needed to pull it off. Winston liked it enough to ask if it could be his directorial debut. Winston would only direct 5 other projects and only 1 other movie. You remember a gnome named Norm, right? Everyone seemed to have a pleasant experience with genre legend Buck Flower going out of his way to say so. While Winston did some rewrites on the shooting script, the screenplay was written by Mark Patrick Carducci and Gary Girani. They were inspired by the movies of Italian legend Mario Bava and created a tale of revenge and pain. This was the first screenplay for Girani, and he would only go on to have 5 additional credits to his name. Carducci, similarly, only had 5 total credits including the screenplay for 80s drive-in classic Neon Maniacs. Carducci may have had more, but he tragically died in 1997 at the age of 42. In front of the camera gives us Lance Hendrickson as the other star of the movie. I say other star because the actual creature of Pumpkinhead, who Winston had to clarify would not actually have a pumpkin for a head, is the true star who would have the biggest legacy as a character. You have genre stalwarts like Buck Flower and even the legendary Dick Warlock, but many of the rest of the cast, or fodder here, never went on to huge acclaim. Hell, some of them had their IMDb picture as their character from this movie. Jeff East was young Clark Kent and Superman and showed up in things like Deadly Blessing and Wes Craven's TV movie Summer of Fear. Kelly Ramsden stopped acting in 1995 but also has Ghoulies 2 and After Midnight under her belt. Joel Hoffman has only been in 10 things but had a 2-year span that included Killer Workout, Slumber Party Massacre 2, Slaughterhouse, and Pumpkinhead. A fun cast that leans heavily on its bigger genre star power, but that gels together well. The movie is a fairly simple one with a legend of something called Pumpkinhead, which is kind of a grief and revenge demon. Young Ed Harley, played by Henriksen, sees this firsthand as a kid and later as a widowed older man, who loses his son to some absolute douche weasel teens. Seriously, nearly none of them are likable. Instead of going to the authorities or burying his son, he follows the breadcrumb trail to the old woman of the woods. He wants revenge like he saw when he was a kid, and boy does he get it. He digs up a corpse from a specific graveyard, and the witch uses blood from the father and the son to create what the locals call Pumpkinhead. Joel, the leader of the gang, makes sure that no one calls the police or goes for help, something that will not heap mercy on him from the audience or the revenge-seeking gourd monster. While Joel eventually decides he wants to turn himself in, Pumpkinhead is already there and unstoppable. He starts killing the kids one by one, and poor old Ed feels every kill and every act of violence in his very soul. Ed tries to have the witch stop it, but she says nothing can be done and he'll die if he tries. Pumpkinhead seems to be turning more human while Ed is becoming more monstrous, and Ed accidentally hurts himself, which he notices also hurts the creature. He's figured out a way to get rid of the creature, but it's gonna cost him his own life. He shoots himself, and one of the final teens finishes him off. Both Ed and Pumpkinhead die, and Ed is buried in the same graveyard that he got the first body from. When someone needs revenge, it will be Ed as the new Pumpkinhead. The first one that stands out, probably because it's Stan Winston and all, is the practical effects. What's wonderful about them is they're timeless. The good ones could have been made in any decade and will always, I repeat, always stand the test of time. The movie makes good use of the creature, and the admittedly less gory deaths to give us viewers something that can be watched by people 35 years later and still enjoy the look and feel. In 1988, we were on the cusp of CGI being implemented both good, like Jurassic Park, and bad, like the end of Night of the Demons 2. CGI in general tends to ebb and flow with its quality, but good practical, it never lets you down. The movie also lives on the cusp era, and by that, I mean it rides fashion, feeling, and dialogue that skate the realm between the 80s and the 90s. It really looks like it could have been released in the late 80s or early 90s, an identity crisis that any cusp movie feels. The other signs of the time involve tropes of that era. While it isn't a slasher movie by most definitions, the group of teens that we watch die follow a lot of the profiles we're used to seeing. While this continued into the 90s and 2000s, the 80s had a special brand, a flavor, if you will. Finally, the movie sets out to create a convincing and reusable villain. They did succeed as the property had 4 movies, a video game, comics, toys, and the other things we will get with our favorite horror properties. The part that wasn't so successful was that none of the movies are really connected other than the fact that they all have Pumpkinhead and Lance even comes back for 2 of them.
There's a price to be paid for doing wrong, and there ain't no running from it.
While the character's cool, you should probably stop after 2, which is dumb but fun. The world building in this movie is great. Not only the legend, but the entire community understands that there is an evil power and the cost to wield such power. The townspeople themselves, from the kids to the older folks like Buck Flower and even Ed Harley, everyone feels like they are from a different time and place altogether. Perhaps cursed by the revenge demon they use to live in squalor. The other part tied to the world building is the resurrection scene. The Witch of the Woods has no qualm bringing the monster back and has clearly done this multiple times. On top of that, while we see her as the one doing it, it's more than probable that she isn't the first of her family or the community to do this trick. That opening introduction scene does a great job of building not only dread but expectation on what we're dealing with. While you don't see Pumpkinhead very clearly, you know what the kids that kill Ed Harley's kid will be up against. Well, there are far fewer things that don't hold up here. I hate to be that guy that picks on kid actors, but our little guy is a little more than emotional fodder for Henriksen and the story to get going. The music here also goes a little too heavy on the podunk aesthetic at times, and other times it's too soft. I actually had quite a few more for this section, but I watched the movie twice in the span of 3 days, and a few of the perceived negatives actually kind of grew on me. One thing that is kind of a bummer, and certainly does not hold up, is the gore, or lack thereof. This is a horror movie with a horrible creature, and the only actual gory death is that of our main mega Chad Joel. While part 2 would rectify this, more gore would actually round out this entry just a little bit more. Pumpkinhead is a good time. Is it the legendary property that its reputation makes it out to be? No, not really. Does it do enough to be thoroughly enjoyable and rank as a late 80s classic that should be watched by any horror fan? Yes, absolutely. It does more than enough to earn its spot as a holiday movie. While Winston went out of his way to make sure that the creature didn't look anything like an actual pumpkin, the content and the title alone give it enough points to be a Halloween rotation movie. Pumpkinhead may not rank up with the other horror villains created in the 70s and 80s, but it more than stands the test of time.
While the Marvel Universe continues to chug along and James Gunn attempts to resuscitate the DC Universe into something worth watching, we will yet again go back to the world of graphic novels for our inspiration on book versus movie. It's really a very untapped realm as there are so many good horror comics out there, many without adaptations yet. The ones that have been adapted are very fun and interesting. Today is the mostly forgotten early 2000s movie that is based on the stunning and epic graphic novel from famed wizard and all-around cranky dude Alan Moore. Like many graphic novels, the journey to page and then screen was long and arduous. It's based on the very real killings in Whitechapel that were later attributed to Jack the Ripper. While both have a lot of truth to them, along with quite a bit of fantasy and conjecture, how close to the source material does the 2001 film get to? Line up your suspects as we find out what happened to this adaptation. Considering the source material From Hell was started in 1989, the movie took quite a bit to get going. This tracks considering the development, forgive me, hell some of Alan Moore's other works went through, like V for Vendetta and most famously Watchmen. Moore is also famously against adaptation of his works, as he's been personally disappointed by nearly every one of them. He even had his name removed from The Watchmen, and it's credited to artist Dave Gibbons in the adapted from section. The rights to the movie passed through a few studios before finally settling in at 20th Century Fox and getting into production. The Hughes brothers were chosen as directors, and Johnny Depp, Heather Graham, Robbie Coltrane, and Ian Holm were signed on to star, with Terry Hayes and Rafael Iglesias hired as screenwriters. The Hughes brothers had made a name for themselves, first with directing a couple of music videos for Tupac, but then in the world of film made a splash with the 90s hit Menace to Society, followed quickly by Dead Presidents. After this movie, it would take a while, but they would come back with the moderate hit The Book of Eli in 2010. They had decent stock when they signed on to direct From Hell, and actually turned down the remake of Planet of the Apes to do so. They originally wanted Daniel Day-Lewis to play Aberline, but when he turned them down, they went through Sean Connery, Brad Pitt, and Jude Law before landing on Johnny Depp. Depp is no stranger to horror, with his first big role being in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and a few other horror movies like Tusk, Secret Window, and The Ninth Gate thrown in. Robbie Coltrane has pretty much no horror to his name besides this, but in addition to his roles in the Pierce Brosnan Bond movies and of course Hagrid from Harry Potter, can I suggest you check out Mona Lisa and maybe Kroll? Graham got her start back in the late 80s and has shown up in things like Twin Peaks, Austin Powers, Boogie Nights, and other horror movies like Scream 2 and the wonderful Suitable Flesh from 2023. Finally, we have Ian Holm, who is more famous now for his role in the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies, but Ash in Alien and his role in The Fifth Element are my personal favorites. The movie was released on October 19, 2001, and made $75 million on its $35 million budget. It was number one in its first week at the box office, but was very middle of the pack for critics. From Hell the comic began development in the late 1980s when Alan Moore had finished watching a documentary on Jack the Ripper. He called his good friend and fellow legend Neil Gaiman, as you do, and asked for his help researching by finding case files of possible suspects. This led him to the theory by Stephen Knight, who proposed that the Ripper identity was created to cover up the birth of an illegitimate royal baby. This theory has been poked with holes and had contrary evidence thrown its way, but in a world of fake news and conspiracies about events being staged to cover up other events, it's not that crazy sounding. The story was released in multiple parts from 1989 to 1998. While it started in the magazine Taboo, The artist and author decided they wanted to move it to its own publishing in 1992. It finished its run in 1998 and was released into a massive 572-page tome that you can still get today with various additions, annotations, and addendums added from the author and other contributors. Moore is almost unmatched in his output with this, V for Vendetta, Watchmen, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and his comic book runs with Swamp Thing and Superman. While we're here, The Killing Joke is just flat-out required Batman reading. From Hell was critically praised and won several awards during its run and in re-release form. Both mediums follow a group of prostitutes and their friend Annie, who ended up marrying a rich man and having a child. Government officials and police separate the girl from her husband and child and have her lobotomized. The rest of the prostitutes begin to be killed off by the Whitechapel murderer, who would later be known as Jack the Ripper. The driver who takes the Ripper to and from his locations is forced to write a letter to the police. The letter is modeled after the real letter sent to authorities when the events took place, dubbed the From Hell letter. Inspector Frederick Aberline is brought into the official investigation, even though some of the police are complicit in covering up the murders. Aberline has little success in identifying the Ripper, but eventually it's revealed to be a physician of the Crown, William Gull. Gull has murdered all of the girls and has become unhinged with his belief that he is a god among men, even within his own secret society. He's put in prison for the rest of his life, and we see a vision of Mary, the final prostitute who he thought he killed, alive in Ireland, and the case of who Jack the Ripper is never gets solved. This is definitely one of those cases of a loose adaptation. The overall story is the same, but there are more things different between the two mediums than there are similarities. The first one is how the narrative is followed. The movie makes it all about Depp's detective, who is also a heroin addict and kind of a psychic. The drug addiction doesn't have a book alternative, but him being a psychic is taken from the psychic the book version of Depp's character runs into and tells him that Gull is the killer. Aberline also dies of an overdose at the end of the movie after keeping a secret about Mary being alive, even though he wants to be with her. There's also no relationship between Mary and Aberline that takes place over a huge chunk of the movie. Sticking with characters and motivations, the prostitutes in the book are actually trying to extort the crown, and that's when the queen turns Gull on them as punishment and a distraction from the royal baby being born. In fact, the entire message of the story and main character is different. While Aberline in the movie is kind of the main guy from the beginning, his character is an almost non-essential part of the comic. Gull is the main character, also known as Jack the Ripper, and we follow his story of going more and more mad as he kills all the women. He has an agenda that he needs to kill the prostitutes to assert the male dominance over females. He sees visions of London in the future, and eventually that he is the inspiration for works of fiction in the next century. While the movie follows Aberline in his journey to find Jack the Ripper, the source material tells you from the beginning who it is and what they're doing. Having that as a movie might have been hard to pull off and keep the audiences engaged. The endings of both men are different as well, with Movie Gull receiving a lobotomy at the hands of his counsel, while Book Gull is put in prison for the rest of his life while he transcends into godhood. There's a lot more political intrigue and even smaller details in the book that don't translate to the movie as well. Spanning 562 pages is pretty huge, while most screenplays for movies that are 2 hours run around 120 pages. The art style didn't quite transfer from page to screen either, unfortunately. While the directors tried their hardest, it just didn't work out as they'd hoped. Normally, it's a difficult decision to make between what holds up, the printed page or the silver screen, but this one's fairly easy. The movie From Hell I mentioned as almost a forgotten-to-time flick, and rewatching it, it's mostly flat. I wanted to like it so much more when I rented it from Video Unlimited over 20 years ago, and I wanted to like it more just 2 weeks ago when I gave it a rewatch for the review. Hell, editor Mike says it's the first movie he fell asleep to in the theater. The book is yet another masterwork by Moore. It's smart, overbearing, belligerent, and a genius take on a subject matter that deserves a crafted and catered look. The movie is an interesting piece of early 2000s horror with a fun cast and the potential to be good, while the book is a must-read for historians, horror fans, and salty necromancing wizard Moore fans alike. Do yourself a favor and read the comics, and then watch the movie as a supplementary spin on a hell of a tale.